It starts with a question that refuses to sit quietly. What if the most dangerous secret in the British monarchy wasn't hidden in a classified government file, but tucked inside a jewelry box that once sat on a woman's bedside? Not a vault, not a safe, a jewelry box. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. According to long circulating whispers inside royal circles, this is the moment that allegedly brought Prince William to tears. Alone, no cameras, no advisors, just a box that once belonged to his mother, and a single folded note that was never meant to be read this way. Imagine that for a second. You're not a king. You're not a symbol. You're a son. And suddenly, the story you've lived your entire life starts to feel incomplete. Here's the unsettling part. For decades, royal watchers have speculated about diaries, letters, secret recordings. Most of them were denied. Some were dismissed as fantasy. Others quietly disappeared. But this story doesn't begin with gossip. It begins with something deeply personal, something intimate, something small enough to be overlooked. A jewelry box, the kind that holds rings, bracelets, fragments of a life lived privately. The kind of object no one expects to carry a confession powerful enough to shake a dynasty. So why does this matter now? Because timing is everything. As conversations about royal legacy, identity, and succession resurface in the public eye, old questions refuse to stay buried. Questions about bloodlines, about silence, about what children inherit beyond crowns and castles. And according to those familiar with the story, this wasn't just any note. It was allegedly written with fear, with urgency, with the knowledge that some truths don't liberate, they destroy. The most chilling line attributed to the note is not what it reveals, but what it asks. If anything happens to me, the truth about William's real father must remain buried. Let that sink in. Not denied, not disproven, buried. Why would a mother, already under relentless scrutiny, feel the need to write something like that? Why would she choose a jewelry box, not a lawyer, not a confidant, to safeguard it? And most importantly, why was it allegedly never meant to be found during her lifetime? This is where the story turns from rumor into something heavier. Because if this account is even partially true, then this isn't about scandal. It's about protection. It's about a woman who understood the brutal machinery of the institution she married into, and the cost her children would pay if certain questions were ever answered out loud. Ask yourself this. If you discovered a message from someone you loved, a message that could change how the world sees you, but also tear apart everything you've built, would you read it again? Or would you wish you'd never opened the box? Those close to William have long described him as deeply private, almost guarded when it comes to his mother. Not just grieving her loss, but carrying something unresolved, something unspoken. And according to this story, the moment that note was read, the weight of that silence became unbearable. Because what he was holding wasn't proof. It was a choice between truth and stability, between personal clarity and collective chaos, between honoring a mother's final wish or finally asking the question no one was supposed to ask. And here's the part that changes everything. Those who claim knowledge of the note say the most devastating detail wasn't the implication itself. It was the reason Diana gave for hiding it. Because according to the account, she believed revealing the truth wouldn't just hurt William. It would destroy someone else. And that brings us to what was written on the final lines of that note, the lines that allegedly stopped him cold. They say the smallest objects hold the heaviest truths. Not crowns, not thrones, not even history books, but the things no one thinks to look inside. The jewelry box wasn't supposed to matter. That's what makes this story so unsettling. Among the personal belongings of Princess Diana, there were items cataloged, archived, and handled with almost surgical care. Dresses, letters, photographs, objects that had already been filtered through public memory and official narratives. But some things were set aside quietly. Too personal, too intimate, not meant for historians or headlines. The jewelry box was one of them. It wasn't grand. It wasn't ornate. Just a modest box lined with velvet, holding fragments of a life Diana lived when no one was watching. Rings from private moments, bracelets gifted in confidence, small keepsakes that carried emotion rather than value. And according to those familiar with the story, it was never meant to be opened in this way. Here's the contradiction that haunts this moment. The royal family is obsessed with preservation, with documentation, with controlling history. Yet some of the most important truths are deliberately left undocumented, protected not by locks, but by silence. Diana understood this better than anyone. She knew what happened to women who spoke too freely. She knew how stories could be twisted, weaponized, erased. So instead of leaving this message with lawyers or friends, she allegedly chose something deeply symbolic. A place no one would search unless they were looking for her, not the crown. Ask yourself this. If you wanted to hide a truth that could shatter the future, where would you put it? Not in a safe, not in a diary. Somewhere personal enough to be overlooked. Somewhere that required love, not curiosity, to be opened. That's what makes the moment so emotionally devastating. Because when Prince William is said to have opened that box, this wasn't an act of investigation. It wasn't suspicion. It was remembrance. A son revisiting pieces of his mother, years after losing her, expecting nostalgia, not revelation. And then there was the note. Not folded neatly, not ceremoniously placed. Just there. As if Diana believed time itself would decide when it should be found. Those close to the situation describe a long pause. Silence. Not shock, something deeper. The kind of stillness that comes when your mind refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. Because the box wasn't just holding jewelry anymore. It was holding intent. A message written not for the world, but for him. Here's what makes this moment unbearable. The box represents everything Diana was denied: privacy, safety, control. And yet, in this final act, she reclaimed all three. She chose when the truth could surface. She chose who would carry it. And she chose the burden that came with it. Imagine realizing that the woman you lost didn't just leave memories behind. She left responsibility. And suddenly, William wasn't just a son remembering his mother. He was the gatekeeper of something that could never be taken back once revealed. Because according to those who claim knowledge of the note, this wasn't a confession meant to be exposed. It was a warning. And the most chilling part? The note didn't begin with an explanation. It began with fear. And when William reached the line explaining why this truth could never surface, it wasn't his own identity that frightened him. It was who the truth would hurt most. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. It wasn't the handwriting that shook him. It was the hesitation inside the words. According to those who claim knowledge of the note, the opening lines weren't dramatic. They weren't poetic. They were cautious, almost restrained, as if the person writing them was afraid the truth might escape simply by being put on paper. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a woman confessing recklessly. This was someone measuring every word, aware that even ink could be dangerous. The note didn't begin with names. It didn't begin with explanations. It began with a condition. If anything happens to me, that alone tells you everything about the state of mind behind it. This wasn't written out of nostalgia. It was written out of fear. Fear that time was running out. Fear that silence might not be enough forever. And then came the warning. Not a revelation. Not a declaration. A warning. Those familiar with the alleged contents say the note was structured in a way that almost felt instructional. As if Diana wasn't just leaving information behind. She was leaving guidance. What to do. What not to do. What must never be allowed to happen. Why would someone do that? Because she understood something most people don't until it's too late. Truth doesn't exist in a vacuum. Once released, it has consequences. And in certain families, especially royal ones, those consequences don't fade. They multiply. Here's where the story tightens. Instead of directly stating a claim, the note reportedly circled around it, referencing timing, referencing pressure, referencing circumstances that no one outside the inner circle could fully understand. Almost as if Diana assumed that one day, William would already know enough to read between the lines. Ask yourself this. If you were writing to your child about something that could destabilize their entire sense of self, would you spell it out clearly? Or would you soften it, hoping they'd never have to read it at all? What makes this note so haunting isn't just what it implies. It's what it refuses to say plainly. The absence, the gaps, the deliberate ambiguity. According to accounts, that ambiguity was intentional, a form of protection disguised as restraint. And then there's the emotional shift halfway through. The tone changes. The caution gives way to apology. This is the part that reportedly broke him. Not the implication, not the secrecy, the apology. Because apologizing to your child for something you've never explained is its own kind of confession. It suggests guilt without detail, responsibility without exposure, love wrapped in fear. And then came the line that allegedly made everything stop. Not about lineage, not about identity, but about damage. The note reportedly warned that revealing the truth would not bring relief. It would not heal wounds. It would fracture lives that had already endured enough loss. It would turn personal history into public spectacle, something Diana had spent her life trying to shield her children from. This is where the story stops being about curiosity. It becomes about burden. Imagine realizing that the greatest act of love your mother left you was silence, and that breaking it might undo everything she tried to protect. According to those close to William, this is where the tears came. Not because of confusion, but because of clarity. Because he understood what the note was truly asking of him. To carry the truth alone. To live with unanswered questions by design. To prioritize stability over certainty. And yet, there was one final line. A line so carefully worded that it didn't command him. It begged him. And that line didn't explain who the truth was about. It explained who it would destroy. And when William reached that point, the question was no longer about the past. It was about whether some truths are too dangerous to survive the light. And what came next forced him to confront the one thing the note could never decide for him. Whether protecting the truth was an act of loyalty, or an act of silence he would regret forever. Here's the question that changes everything. What if the truth isn't dangerous because it's false, but because it's real? That is the dilemma the note allegedly left behind. Because once the shock faded, once the tears dried, the problem wasn't what the words suggested. It was what they demanded. Silence, endurance, restraint. The kind of restraint that doesn't look heroic from the outside, but feels unbearable on the inside. This is where the story shifts from mystery to morality. According to those familiar with William's reaction, the days that followed were marked by withdrawal. Not panic, not denial. Thought. Deep, isolating thought. Because the note didn't just raise a question about identity, it reframed responsibility. Identity is personal. Responsibility is inherited. And in royal families, responsibility always comes first. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If a truth could destabilize not just your life, but the lives of your children, your family, your country, would knowing it make you stronger? Or would it make you reckless? This is the contradiction Diana reportedly understood all too well. She lived inside an institution that thrived on certainty, yet survived on secrecy. She knew how quickly speculation could metastasize into scandal. She knew how fragile public trust really was. And most importantly, she knew what happened to children caught in the crossfire of adult revelations. This is why, according to the account, the note doesn't argue for disclosure. It argues for containment. Those close to the story say William didn't immediately question the claim. He questioned the cost. What would this truth actually change? Would it bring peace? Or simply satisfy curiosity at the expense of stability? Because here's the thing people often forget. Truth doesn't arrive alone. It arrives with consequences. Once spoken, it can't be controlled. It can't be redirected. It belongs to everyone, not just the person it affects most. And in this case, the fallout wouldn't be private. It would be global. That's the weight William was allegedly carrying. Not the shock of possibility, but the burden of choice. And this is where the story becomes less about bloodlines and more about legacy. Because legacy isn't just about who your parents were. It's about what you choose to protect when given the power to expose. Some close observers have pointed out something curious over the years. William has rarely engaged with speculation about his mother's private life. He has never encouraged it, never fed it, never tried to clarify it. Instead, he has consistently redirected attention back to service, continuity, and stability. Coincidence? Or decision? If the account of the note is accurate, then that silence isn't avoidance. It's compliance. Compliance with a request that asked him to put duty above self. To live with unanswered questions so others wouldn't have to suffer public ones. To accept that some truths, once known, must remain unspoken, not because they're false, but because they're destructive. But here's the unresolved tension. Silence doesn't erase truth. It just postpones it. And that's what makes this story linger. Because even if William chose to honor the note, even if he chose restraint over revelation, The question remains alive, not answered, not disproven, just waiting, waiting for the wrong moment, waiting for the wrong person, waiting for time to loosen the grip of secrecy. And according to those familiar with Diana's mindset, she understood this risk. She knew secrets don't stay buried forever. They resurface, sometimes decades later, sometimes through accident rather than intention. Which raises a chilling possibility. What if the note wasn't meant to end the story, but to delay it? What if Diana's final act wasn't to hide the truth indefinitely, but to ensure it would only surface when the cost could no longer be catastrophic? Because if that's the case, then the real question isn't what the note said. It's whether the moment she feared is still ahead of us. And that leads directly to the final and most haunting thought of all. What happens when the truth outlives the silence meant to protect it?